Good afternoon. We have the pleasure of being with Dr. John Henry Clarke, one of the world's most preeminent historians on Africa and African American history. Dr. Clarke, today we want to deal with the history of the slave trade. First of all, could you give us an overview of Africa's place in world history before European contact?
Now, before European contact, and when we're dealing with the slave trade, we should really deal with the slave trade, or at least refer to it as an international institution that touched the life of every people on the face of the earth. When we're dealing with the African slave trade, we have to deal with the different periods. We have to deal with the period of the Arab slave trade that started 600 years before the European slave trade. Then we must deal with how and why the African slave trade started. Now, for most of the existence of Africa, most of the time African people have been on the earth, they've been free, independent people, free of foreign domination, free of slavery. The Arab slave trade was the first massive slave trade in Africa. You have to make a clear distinction between slavery and servitude. Concurrent with European feudalism, systems of servitude existed all over the world. China, India, and some of these systems still existed. But these systems of servitude had nothing to do with and did not resemble chattel slavery. Up until the Roman period, when the Romans, with the pressure of Islam, were driven out of Africa, most African states were independent states. We're not talking about nation states similar to the artificial borders that's in most African states of the day, or the nation states of Europe, or the nation states in the United States. We're talking about states with loose borders. We're talking about states with cultural borders as against geographical borders. Mm-hmm. Africa had a pretty reasonable time of it, in as much as you had a society that dictated that land could not be bought or sold. It was the collective property of a whole people as against that of a given landlord. Therefore, feudalism could not develop. Mm-hmm. Now, while there was domination, there was no land grabbing and land ownership to the point where no man could find enough land to feed his family. With the coming of the Arab domination of the land, and with the coming of people who began to claim title to the land, mm-hmm. and with the offsprings of the Arabs claiming title to their father's land, both in West and inner West Africa and large parts of East Africa, you begin to find a form of landlordism that began to resemble European feudalism. Mm-hmm. Now, once this was challenged by the coming of the European did not come to Africa looking for land at first. He came looking for trade at mm-hmm. first. Legitimate trade to the...
What you're watching is John Henry Clarke, our black historian. This is the man that made us aware of our history. And the interviewer is Clemson Brown, our dear brother who's been on this show, I don't know, 24 times. He's family like the other two brethren here. And he passed, what was the date?
It's a week ago.
A week ago?
I believe it was Sunday. Yeah.
Sunday? A week ago Sunday. he would have been 84. August 25th, was it?
I don't know the exact date.
But August, this August coming, he would have been 84. So he's 2 years old, elder, our 2-year elder between I and Leroy. But that's the 80s for you. So what we're doing today is showing you the better half. The historian, he did videography for Dr. Clark, and I think the first time they went to Egypt was the 60s.
I think so. I think
And
it was.
you ever go to his house, and he has a warehouse of, you know, he's a videographer, a cameraman, such as myself. And we go way back, 30 years. And one of the greatest stories ever told by Clemson and videoed by Clemson was the Tawanna Brawley case. And Graham and him were comrades in fighting that case and bringing the truth at a time when the truth was very seldom shown or taught, or we knew in them. Well, we didn't know the history of Africa like we do today from John Clark, and we're paying this homage to Clemson Brown for his years of dedication to bringing the truth and history of being black on the planet, not just New York or America, but the entire planet. And we're learning through John Henry Clark the history of slavery, what is dialogue, that statement, that last interview. Well, let's go to item 2, or was it 1A, and we're going to run something on Tawanna Brawley and the lies told. And this is recorded by Clemson Brown. Can you go to the video?
This is Dutchess County, New York. It is one of the wealthiest counties in the United States of America, and consequently one of the most powerful counties in the country as well. It is the home of IBM headquarters, the Texaco Research Center, the Vanderbilt family and estate, and the Roosevelt family and estate. Here lies the grave and tombstone of the late President Franklin D. Roosevelt, the godfather of the New Deal liberal doctrine, and his wife Eleanor Roosevelt. This family still remains affectionately embedded in the hearts and souls of the American people in particular, and the Western world in general. And in the midst of Dutchess County's wealth and international prominence exists one of the most explosive, racially charged cases in the annals of America's history. On November the 28th, 1987, a 15-year-old African-American female by the name of Tawanna Brawley was found unconscious and in a garbage bag in the backyard of her family's former address in the Pavilion Condominium Complex in Wappingers Falls. Wappingers Falls is located in Dutchess County, New York. In addition to have been found unconscious and in a garbage bag, Tawanna was also found with cotton stuffed in her nose and ears, KKK and nigger bitch scrawled over her body, and dog feces smeared on her being as well. According to Tawanna, on November the 24th, 1987, approximately 8:30 p.m., she got off a short line bus in front of this Mobile service station, which is located on Route 9 in Wappingers Falls. As the bus proceeded north on Route 9, she walked across Route 9 and onto Middlebush Road. As she proceeded to walk across Middlebush Road toward home, a green four-door car pulled up next to her. A white man, about 6 feet tall, jumped out of the car, flashed a badge, and forced her into the car. But when she resisted, she was struck on the head and thrown into the car, and she was taken into a wooded area where she was raped and sodomized. This morbid and atrocious crime perpetrated against Tawanna triggered off one of the most uncompromising militant movements to ever sweep this country.
Interesting. Now, mind you, this is 1987, 2 years before the Central Park joggers case. And tell us your involvement, Graham. How did you you didn't get involved until years later.
Yeah,
What-
I was still working
In 87.
Right, so I was working cases. Where was I? 87, I was in Brooklyn.
Okay.
And working cases in Brooklyn. And you know, the interesting thing about this case is that the media didn't really cover it. They said automatically that it was a lie. They tried to say that Tawanna was out, she was afraid to go home, her father was going to beat her, and that Ralph was really abusive towards her. So there was a spin given by the media. And the only network, I shouldn't say network, but the only paper that covered this daily was the City Sun. Andy Cooper, the late Andy Cooper, and Utrice Lead, who is right now in Florida in very poor health. But Utrice followed this case daily. And she was the only reporter that followed it daily and gave the community an up-to-date assessment of what was going on. So the thing is that that car that was mentioned, the description of the man, the officer that flashed the badge, I got involved in the case in 1995 when the civil case was brought up. You see, there was no criminal investigation. There was no criminal trial.
Well, when did Clemson do this piece?
What you saw there was
in,
probably from 87.
Yeah.
10 years later comes the civil trial. There was never a criminal trial. There was a grand jury. This is the interesting part. Attorney General Bob Abrams allegedly conducted an investigation. And his final...
What year are we talking?
In 87, 88.
Okay.
The fact was that Alton Maddox was not going to provide any further information because they found out that Bob Abrams was giving information over to Stephen Pagonis, who was one of the people that was a possible suspect in the case. That was initially stated by Supreme Court Justice Judith Hillary.
And Pagonis was...
Pagonis was an assistant district attorney working in the same building as Judge Hillary.
All right.
So she was the first one that named Stephen Pagonis as a suspect.
Who named Stephen Pagonis?
Justice Judith Hillary. Justice Judith Hillary. When Tawanna was found, she was taken to the hospital. She was evaluated. EMS will evaluate you from a 0, which is deceased, to a 10, which is in good health.
Yeah, we had a video on
She was evaluated at a 3.
Right.
She was near dead. Now, her pupils were fully dilated. You cannot dilate your eyes unless there is a health condition or you're on drugs. There were no drugs in her system. The medical report was over 100 pages long with regard to her health. She could not have faked what was going on in her body. She couldn't say to them, well, this happened to me and that happened to me, and then there's nothing there. They found these things. Her pubic area, the blood vessels in her pubic area were ruptured from the rape. She had chlamydia as well. She was sodomized. All of this came out in the trial, and the only reason the trial ever came out on the civil end, Tawanna, they called it Tawanna Brawley trial, but there was no Tawanna Brawley trial. This was a civil trial brought by Stephen Pagonis against Alton Maddox, Reverend Sharpton, and Steve Vernon Mason.
Oh, okay.
Alton strategized this. This is how smart Alton was, because he knew that Bob Abrams was never going to get to the bottom of this case. There was an incestuous relationship. Pagonis' father was a judge in the county.
Mm-hmm.
There was a relationship between Bob Abrams. They brought in the quote-unquote pathologist. He had been the pathologist here in New York.
Remind him who Pagonis is. Pagonis is the guy accused of the rape.
Accused, one of the people accused.
Wonderful.
Now, let me go back. The day of her discovery,
mm-hmm.
she couldn't have any white men around her. She was fearful. She's traumatized.
Mm-hmm.
They brought in a black police officer, of which there was only one in the county.
Mm-hmm.
He was interviewing her.
Mm-hmm.
And when she told him that a white cop with a handlebar mustache grabbed her, he stopped asking questions. He got up and he left the room. He never conducted a complete interview of her. He went to report that she's stating that a police officer is a suspect in her abduction and her rape.
Did he know who the cop was?
No. But his job was to get the full story, which he never did.
He heard cop involved.
He heard cops, so he ran to let his higher-ups know, oh, she's alleging that a police officer raped her. Now, a police officer could be anybody in the state.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So.
You think he might have known who this cop was?
No,
With the
I don't think he
description of
did.
handlebar and that?
No, I don't think so, because
Okay.
Harry Christ, whose car, the car she described,
Mm-hmm.
was impounded and taken to a scrapyard and disposed of a couple of days after Harry Christ was found dead in his apartment from a gunshot wound. Ironically enough, we found out that it was Harry Christ, most likely, who took Tawanna out of the dumpster. She was placed in that dumpster that you saw in the video.
Yeah.
She was placed in the dumpster. Harry went back and took her out of the dumpster and put her on the ground. Because if the sanitation had come, they would have just simply
We would never know.
dropped her in the back of, in the truck, and no one
Yeah.
would have found her.
Yeah.
There was a discussion between Harry Christ, Stephen Pagonis, and another gentleman whose name I can't remember. They went to Connecticut to some mall, and they had an argument. Harry Christ pulled his gun on Stephen Pagonis and put it to his head, and he told him he'd blow his brains out. This is days before Harry wound up dead. Now, Harry Christ was a sheriff's deputy in the county.
Mm-hmm.
He owned a .38 caliber weapon.
Mm-hmm.
A few days later, he winds up dead of a gunshot wound.
Mm-hmm.
The bullet didn't go through his head, but it was a 357 round bullet.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't own a 357. During the trial, Alton was saying to me, they won't show me the crime scene photos and this and that and the other.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, what did they give you? One Polaroid photo. I said, let me see it. I said, Alton, this is not a suicide. He said, but for 10 years, Harry Christ's family even believed that he committed suicide and could not have a funeral in a Roman Catholic church because it was stated that he committed suicide. When the police came to Harry Christ's house, Stephen Pagonis was at the state police troop. The call came over of a police officer dead. Pagonis inquired, well, who was it? They said, Harry Christ. He said, oh, that's my friend. Can I go with you? So he responded with the state police to Harry Christ's house. This is the guy that threatened to blow his brains out.
Mm-hmm.
This is my friend. Harry Christ, as I said, did not own a .357 Magnum. He owned a .38.
Now, how is it that you know all this?
Well, I was working this case with Alton. So Alton was the tactician. And Alton Alton prompted this case for 10 years. He went after Stephen Pagonis with such a vengeance.
You know all this because you were up there investigating this?
I wound up investigating the death of Harry Chris for Alton.
All right. Okay.
So they refused to give him the crime scene photos.
Okay.
One of the other friends, the state trooper, whose name I can't remember, said he left his wedding band at his house because they were lifting weights the day before, and he left his wedding band. He went back and he found Harry like that. Interesting. Harry's dead, but the gun is not there. How do you shoot yourself? And the gun disappears. And then suddenly the gun appears. And the gun is not your gun. Because Harry didn't own a 38. He owned a 38, not a 357 Magnum. So when Alton got the photograph, it's a photo of Harry Chris laying in the morgue, and the picture was taken from the feet. So that the camera is looking this way. And I told Alton, because he wanted to call the pathologist to get an idea of what was the cause of death. We knew it was gunshot, but under what circumstances? I said, Alton, call the pathologist. This is a homicide. He says, Grandma, I said, Alton, you do law. I do forensics, okay? I said, I'm gonna tell you why this is a homicide. I said he was shot at close range. There was a bruise over, I think it was over the right nipple. And I said, he was shot at close range and this was a struggle. Most likely the front sight of the gun during the struggle, somebody was over him and the front sight scraped him from the nipple upward. I said, had he shot himself, in order to put a bullet through your head from this angle, you have to bend your arm all the way up. You can't shoot yourself from down here because your wrist doesn't turn, all right? You have to fully cock your elbow, bringing the weapon right here, which means you're not just gonna have a bullet hole. We're gonna look for an abrasion ring, which is caused as the bullet spins through your skin, just like when you play in a gym.
Now, 357 Magnum?
357 Magnum.
Wouldn't that have blown the head off?
Now, you would expect,
we
would expect an exit wound at the back of the head. The angle from which that bullet went through, it struck the back of the skull and turned. So it never exited the skull.
But that's not a 357.
No, it was a 357 Magnum, but it was the angle. The skull was pretty hard, so as the bullet struck the skull, it turned. It was just the right angle so that the bullet didn't. A guy shot me with a 22.
What happens at the ending of this movie?
So
it's a movie.
I said,
scene.
Alton,
oh, man.
There's just a bullet hole with an abrasion ring because the bullet causes friction as it's spinning through your skin, so your skin gets puffy from the friction as the bullet spins through. We are looking for what we call tattooing. We're looking for the gas from the muzzle blast, and we're looking for burnt tissue because it's a close contact, or if you shot yourself, it would have been a full contact wound. None of that was there. I said, Alton, he was shot from a distance maybe 1 to 2 feet, but he didn't kill himself. This is not a self-inflicted gunshot wound. So when Alton called the pathologist, he said, it said on there contact wound, not full contact. And the pathologist said, no, this is not a suicide, it's a homicide. And Harry Chris' mother and aunt jumped up. They were sitting across the courtroom with Pagonis' family, and they came and sat on our side with Alton. See, so there were things going on. There was an FBI agent that was involved in the case, that was involved with Pagonis prior to.
All right, I'm going to just show the audience what kind of, now we know the true story. Well, play item 3, and I want to show you what the media was talking about and how Sharpton got involved with this because him and
Alton, C. Vernon
were the defenders of Tawanna. Run item 3. Was it 3?
Pick a number from 1 to 10.
Well, we changed them up. Is that the one we changed it to?
Clip.
next to the last one. These show you what the media does with all these innuendos. All right?
My name is Tawanna Brawley. All right. I'm not a liar and I'm not crazy.
It was 1987. Tawanna Brawley was a 15-year-old who claimed she was raped by 6 white men in law enforcement. And Al Sharpton took up her cause. But there was no forensic evidence of any sexual attack, and there was evidence Tawanna made up the whole story. The case, labeled a hoax, was dismissed, and Sharpton was forced to pay $65,000 to those he had named. But in all this time, he has never voiced any regret. You have gone back and looked at things with such a clear eye. You've apologized, you've asked for forgiveness, except on Tawanna Brawley. I don't get it.
I'll be honest with you. I have thought about that a million times. I just don't believe they treated that case fair.
If I knew that I had in any way contributed to falsely accusing someone, I think I would feel an obligation to say I'm sorry.
I think you're right. I think the operative word is if you knew that. I don't know that.
If they didn't do
But
it,
if, but suppose they
you're
did.
taking the,
Suppose they did.
but they didn't. They didn't.
This is not the Central Park jogger case, man.
You know what I mean?
You know?
They're so convinced. How did Leslie Stahl get so convinced that they didn't do it?
The media.
I mean, what is
Not
this?
only that, it was in their interest to how many white men have been convicted for raping a black woman?
A black woman.
Thank you.
I mean, millions of black women have been raped
Wow.
since our people been here by white men. That's all white men did at one time. As a matter of fact, that's a part of Make America Great Again.
Ooh.
That white men will have access to all of the sex that they want from black women. That was when America was great.
Look
I
at the
mean,
shades
all
of black here.
of this. I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
Right?
but through all this period, I doubt if you got 3 white men in the history of blacks in America that have been convicted for raping our mothers over the past 350 years that we've been here.
May
And
I
yet,
say this?
millions upon millions of them were raped. Every sexual encounter
Women.
was a rape deal.
Do you remember what you said after that? You were about to speak. I didn't put you in there. But how are you reacting to that? Do you remember that show we did?
Talking to me, Brother Leroy.
Yes. You were right there.
My reaction, you know, first of all, Brother Clemson, in doing, because you're not able to show everything that he put together, he has done a tremendous service overall for us as a people dealing with black history.
Right.
In that particular case, it was current events.
Mm-hmm.
And he had his own personal background enabling him to say what he said. He said, nowhere would you find 3 white men who, through history, who were found, accused and found guilty of raping a black woman. I'm paraphrasing what he said. The film, there's another piece. The Alton Maddox piece is a portrayal of a brilliant individual. Brother Graham covered some of that, and Alton Alton said publicly after that trial, the civil trial, he said, "I'm the only one." Maybe he didn't say the only. He said, "I can say that Pagonis raped Tawanna Brawley, because in that case he was found not guilty of slander. I think it's slander, something like that." And how he did it, I wasn't at the trial, but I interviewed Alton. The thing that comes to mind for me has been the Central Park jogger case and the Tawanna Brawley case. What you have with the Central Park jogger case is, I know those black guys did it.
Right.
In the case of Tawanna Brawley, you have that same media and Negroes who followed that. I know the white guys didn't do it.
Right.
Yes.
So you have this polarity of the system of white supremacy is a common term these days, but black inferiority. She doesn't have the right. She doesn't have the gumption to tell the truth, and she doesn't have the right to accuse these white men of rape. And the information that Clemson Brown has, the interviews that he did with the mailman, with the doctor in the hospital,
Yeah,
you heard the intro to that piece saying that there was no evidence that she was raped, and that's contrary to what Brother Graham saw, etc. Those cases are to be studied for me. Those cases are to be studied together by some folks, some of us who are involved in law, and the history of black women as victims in America. What Clemson has done, and may God be pleased with him and his family, he has documented that which would not have been documented. He put this information together, and you know, it rings true today. But Alton is the untold story. There's a lot of untold stories. Alton, brilliant brother that has to be told and studied by our people who are into law, who are studying to become lawyers. Tawanna, I'm as much a victim of the misinformation, because if it wasn't for the City Sun, which Graham mentioned earlier, if it wasn't for the City Sun, I would not have known in detail what was going on in Wappinger Falls. And that is a testament for the value of black media. Black folks, black print media, and black newspapers in particular, because that's the history of black protests in America, is the papers, the newspapers. And black folks today must support black media. They must support black news. The Amsterdam News, they should be selling out every week. What is it to spend $1 on a paper and get information about your people that you wouldn't get anywhere else? You're not going to get it from the News, the Post, the New York Times, Financial Times. You ain't going to get it. So that is, in this program, this is another one of Brother Leroy's, when folks are dialing, they're surfing the TV and or cable, and they see 3 black guys talking, and they ain't boogie dancing and stuff like that, and they ain't talking about no women, and hey man, what party didn't you go to, and give me some Tito gin. They stop it, they turn past it, and they come back, what these Negroes talking about? And as a result, they see it as a source of information. That is, in this dialogue here regarding Clemson, regarding your experience, Brother Graham, and you, Brother Gilchrist, in documenting. I mean, you got documentarian on documentary.
Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah. This is critical, what you've been doing. When did we start? Like 99, 2000? After Amadou got killed?
9/11.
It was that late? 9/11?
It was the CIA thing that we did with Ed.
You know, but this is so critical. What you're saying is true.
Yeah, we got 25
The likes of yourself and Clemson Brown, there are no other people.
Oh, yeah.
There may be somewhere else in the country. I pray there are other brothers and sisters documenting the history of our people and discussing what is happening in our communities.
Yeah.
But to this level, no. The only other brother we had was Gil Noble.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, okay.
You know, and it hurt me because I was in Georgia when Alton died, and I flew back, you know, for the funeral. And Clemson is gone. And I work closely with, you know, Clemson and I rode together every day to go to Poughkeepsie. Every morning we rode up to Poughkeepsie and came home in the evening. And I know Alton sometimes never went to bed before 3 o'clock in the morning, because that's how diligent he was about his craft. And I've seen trials, and I've commented on attorneys and said, to them, you know, you handled that witness the way Alton Maddox would have dissected. He said, and I had a gentleman tell me once, he said, Alton Maddox was my law professor. And that was the defense attorney for John White when we handled his trial out in Suffolk County.
Yeah.
All right? So
John White.
there was a blessing in that Alton could teach and enable black attorneys to handle cases even now in his absence. And that's why it's so critical, because whatever we do, it's not about us. It has to be about the people coming behind us, the next generations, and to set that example for them to grab the mantle, to grab the baton, and keep going. You know, it's you know, what all this videography, it's critical. It's critical information.
I look at some of this old stuff that we did 20 years ago and see that we're going backwards. You know, like we did James Smalls and I did a show on Amadou. Well, no, I'm confused. That was another show. I was doing something on Emmett Till, and then we started talking about Amadou Diallo, the comparison of the two, which is no comparison because Amadou was an immigrant. We did a show last week about immigrants coming to America, seeing this as being the land of the free, the home of the brave, and believing all these idealistic ideas of the Constitution. So, one man, one vote, and all the fantasies of coming to America. And this guy's father was robbed in the Bronx the first time he was, one of his first week here in America. And he chased the guy down and caught it and got his money back. And he said to the guy, "Why are you robbing me? This is America. Why are you stealing from me? This is America." You know, why is anybody stealing from anybody? When all you have to do is work hard and be righteous, and you can do anything that you want to do. But that's the whole theme of America. And we that gone through all this struggling and all the, you know, you got Martin Luther King, you know, the whole, what was the statement he made? America is something about the promise to pay us a certain amount of money.
Just write what you put on paper. Just do what you did on paper. Yeah.
That was one of his speeches.
Fulfill.
Another one about our rights. Oh, I'm so confused today. Anyway, let's go to the videotape and we'll talk later on about what I had in mind. Run item 4, will you? Or the man.
Tawanna Brawley is a 16-year-old girl whose story is the talk of New York these days.
The New York State teenager who claims that she was abducted and raped by 6 white men.
In the late 1980s, Tawanna Brawley became a household name as her horrific stories spread across the nation.
She had KKK written across her chest and nigger across her stomach.
Leading to widespread outrage.
We're going to expose the facts in these crimes that you do against black people.
And intense soul-searching about race in America.
Let Miss Brawley represent what we're not going to stand for as parents, as Americans, and as human beings.
But how did investigators discover the truth behind the Brawley rape, and what is its legacy today?
I think that the lessons of Brawley is very instructive for me and others, but I think that people want to cut off the lessons where they want.
In November 1987, a news story from a small town 70 miles north of New York City shocked the nation.
Special segment tonight, the Tawanna Brawley case.
She was found wrapped in a plastic bag, by some accounts, sexually assaulted.
The 16-year-old cheerleader said she'd been abducted 4 days earlier and had been repeatedly raped and sodomized. She was found in a fairly frightening state. She had a pair of sneakers which had been cut with a razor. Her hair seemed matted and covered with feces. There was writing on her chest. The jeans that she had were burnt in the crotch. It was like this is not a normal state to find someone.
More unsettling was the claim Brawley made on national television about one of her attackers.
He's a cop. He was a police officer.
Brawley attracted a team of activists to her side. The Reverend Al Sharpton, C. Vernon Mason, and Alton Maddox were well known in the press, having recently focused attention on another racially charged case, the killing of a black youth who was fleeing a white mob in Howard Beach, Queens.
New York State is now the capital of racial violence.
In the Brawley case, they saw the makings of a cover-up and demanded a special prosecutor take over.
I was a spokesman for the legal team and the family of Miss Brawley. I was involved to help bring light on the fact that there was a situation here that needed to be adjudicated.
We are not going to let this girl be the scapegoat of a corrupt system. We want to show the world how low down, doggish, and callous the state of New York is.
Brawley's advisors declared they had a suspect, a young police officer named Harry Christ Jr., who had committed suicide days after her attack.
The media now has released that Tawanna identified Chris.
What's the evidence, Sage?
Tawanna's voice on the tape identifying Chris.
With protesters taking to the streets, the state attorney general dispatched veteran investigator John Ryan to upstate New York, with orders to solve the increasingly sensitive case.
We attempted immediately to sit down with Tawanna and her family, and we reached out repeatedly to her attorneys, her advisors, and that was never fruitful.
Her lawyers, it was their decision, along with her family, which I announced, that they did not want to cooperate because they did not trust the special prosecutor that was appointed by the governor.
We might send them a letter, and then, you know, they'd have a press conference.
They're at a press conference, and all of a sudden, Alton Maddox pops out with this guy's name.
Her lawyers charged that Dutchess County Assistant District Attorney Stephen Pagonis was among the girl's attackers and demanded his arrest.
We have the facts and the evidence that an assistant district attorney and a state trooper did this.
She made statements to the lawyers. She never made statements to me. I did not ask a 15-year-old girl what happened. I believe the lawyers believed their client, and I believe that we had an obligation to go forward.
Without Brawley's cooperation, Ryan tried to divine some clues from the initial police investigation.
In the course of the interview with the police, she literally only said one word. She would also indicate, I believe by eye blinks, they would ask her a question and she would indicate yes or no. The police officer took what they could get. She was found in a grassy area behind the building that her family had previously lived in, very near the apartment that was then vacant but unlocked. She had literally just come off being grounded because she got home at 5 in the morning from some party. She goes to visit a boyfriend in jail, and then she eventually takes the bus home, and that's the last time anybody saw her officially.
Now, actually, we saw the beginning piece, if you remember. It was 8:30 at night when they picked her up. So where this 5 o'clock in the morning came from, I mean, you can see, now Graham got involved and we went through the story of what actually happened. So we're just showing you how it takes the inside videographer, investigative reporter to get the truth of the matter. All these cases, I mean, well, the Central Park joggers case was at 2 years later, and the same sort of police mentality goes on still today.
You know, in a rape case, we go to school. It's not like on television. You know, they give a guy a badge and he goes out and solves cases. We go to school for every crime that there is on the books. There's a school for it. You not only go to the school, but you have to pass that course to be certified. In a rape case, you're dealing with an individual who is traumatized, and rape is the only crime that takes place inside the human body. It is more than traumatic and personal. It's extremely personal. we would do multiple questionings of the victim because of the trauma. And you're not going to get the whole story in one interview. It takes a period of time, and the brain will shut down. In a traumatic situation, the brain will shut down. In a painful situation, the brain will shut down to keep the person from expiring.
But why wouldn't they let a woman interview a rape victim?
Here's the thing in that. We would think that a woman would be more sensitive, and a woman would be.
Yeah.
But there are counterbalances to that, because a woman may feel that a woman can't protect her. This is a man that violated her, and she may look at this woman, well, how is she going to protect me? She's a woman. And this was a man that violated me. There's a lot of psychology that goes into this. So in this case, and I remember we brought Tawanna and her parents into New York. You know what they did? When they left Wappinger Falls, they had to get out. Alton told them they better leave for their own safety. I spoke with her father. Ralph said they cut their credit cards were cut off. All of their financial connections were gone, just overnight. No credit cards worked, nothing. It was like a science fiction movie. But he prayed. He asked God, why is this happening? I just want to protect my baby and my family. We held a dinner for Tawanna at United African Movement in Brooklyn. News One was present. The brother from News One, his father used to play ball. Dean Meminger, thank you. Dean Meminger.
Yeah, right.
I'm standing with Tawanna. Dean comes to interview her. And that's when I saw it for myself, the trauma that she was still in. The cameraman was white. And she said, I can't do this. She started shaking. She said, I can't do this. He's too close to me. The cameraman, she apologized. She apologized to the cameraman. But she couldn't do it with him being that close to her. And this is more than 10 years after the victimization.
And she was 15 when it happened.
Right. She was a grown woman living in Virginia when Dean came to interview her that evening at the dinner. Alton did what he did to provoke the case. Tell
a story about Pagonis had a defamation case against her and won.
Yes.
Something like a settlement of $67,000?
Right, for her to pay out of her paycheck every week.
As a nurse.
Right.
He was getting money out of her salary.
Out of her salary. You see, Alton provoked Pagonis to sue so that we could get the information on court record. His lawyer said it was a lie, they defamed him, and when he tore open the seal on the medical records and started to read, he was shocked. And he looked at Pagonis. Some of the women in the jury wanted a recess because what they were hearing, they couldn't take it. That's why I said there was over 100 pages of medical documentation to the damage that was done to this 15-year-old girl. And his own lawyer looked at him. People don't know. His wife left him after that trial.
Right, that's right.
She took the children and she was gone.
Yeah.
How could a 15-year-old girl know where and with whom you spent Thanksgiving? But Tawanna knew because she was in the proximity of Pagonis while he was talking about what he was doing while they had her abducted up there in Wappinger Falls.
Oh, she was in the
She could hear the conversations.
She could hear the conversation.
We brought in, Alton brought in a former New York State trooper who was serving time at the time, had him produced, and he testified of various crimes that he committed for the Pagonises. He was serving time. We were approached, I was approached a block or two from the courthouse by an attorney. And he said to me, his name was Tepper. He was the attorney for G. Gordon Liddy. You remember that name?
Oh, yeah.
G. Gordon Liddy?
Yeah.
Right. He was G. Gordon Liddy's attorney. He said to me, you're the guy working with Pagonis, with Alton Maddox. I said, yes. He says, I hope you get these so-and-sos because somebody needs to take them down. They're crooked as the dog's hind leg.
So whatever happened to Pagonis? Pagonis is...
He's still free. He has a little private investigations company the last time I checked.
And collecting money from Tawanna.
Right. And Pagonis was in New York City on a regular basis surveilling Reverend Sharpton.
That's right. I heard that.
So people just don't know the story. Dr. Jackman wrote a book. They called her a liar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Dr.
we did
Jackman,
a show with
yes, she's a retired school principal here in New York City. She did an excellent piece. But this case is not done. You know, I think of the Emmett Till case. It took over 60 years, 70 years to get to the truth on that case.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a dear friend of mine who is also gone, who prompted that case to be reopened, at least to get to the point where this woman admitted that she lied. But this is where we are, you know. This is who we are as a nation.
How did Alton not be charged with slander, whatever that charge was, in Sharp? What did Alton do that you could share with us?
You know, he was a tactician. We're sitting in the courtroom at the table, and Alton is talking to Stephen. He never looked at him.
Mm-hmm.
He addressed him, but he never looked at him. And Stephen was going off. He said, you know, you have to prove to the jury that you're innocent. And he said, you said such and such. He said, I never said that, you're a liar. And Alton calmly said, now, let me have binder number 2. Now, these binders are about that thick.
Yeah.
Let me have binder number 2. He walks past, he puts it on the stand, doesn't look at Pagonis. He says, turn to page 842, paragraph 2, line 3. And read that. That should refresh your recollection. Alton had that stuff embedded in his brain. And Pagonis responded, he said, oh, I did. And the jury, he says, oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor. Alton was a master tactician. He was an attorney, defending himself pro se. All right? The crazy thing was that they found them guilty of libel and slander. Say there were 10 days that they were deliberating over. But they found them guilty on this day, and that day. But if you said the same thing 10 times over, how can you be guilty on 3 accounts and not guilty on the other 7 days that you said the same thing? So we knew the jury was rigged. They had to find them guilty on something, at least once, to support Stephen Pagonis. And the funny thing was, we couldn't get this FBI agent to come in. She said, I don't have to respond. She was supposedly brought in to help with the case.
Mm-hmm.
And we found out that she had a relationship with Stephen Pagonis.
Oh.
Oh, yeah. The FBI agent. All right? So she wouldn't come in. I went downtown to John Pritchard III, who was the first deputy commissioner of NYPD at the time, and John and I were good friends. I said, John, I need your help. We need to get an FBI agent in, but she's refusing to come. So I said, I need you to call Louis Freed, who was the national director, have him order her to come in. See, life is about relationships. So I said, this is not about Louis Freed. We're not accusing him of anything because he wasn't the deputy director of the FBI at the time this incident happened. I said, but we need this agent. And he and Louis Freed were all partners. They were detectives together. So he made a phone call. She was there the next day. So it was to expose the relationship and how she was protecting Pagonis. I also investigated the murder of another police officer in Dutchess County. Michael Baden, remember that name?
How about Clemson Brown?
Well, Clemson.
How's Clemson? Because we don't have too much time left.
Clemson, we had press conferences every day after lunch, or just before lunch, and then at the end of the day. And there was a guy there that was a little rambunctious, and a reporter told him to shut up, stupid, we're working. And he So Clemson is filming, and I give him a nod because I'm standing next to the guy. I notice shotgun shells in the cargo pants, and the guy's, and he goes off. And Clemson, I said, Clemson. So he's following me with the camera. The guy crosses the street. I tell him to stop. I pull my gun. Clemson is filming, and everybody runs over. We cuff the guy, take him. The Secret Service was in town looking for the guy because he was threatening Bill Clinton to kill Bill Clinton. Clemson didn't miss a thing. We would walk from the hotel after lunch, and Clemson was filming. He's filming us just walking in the street. Every interview that was conducted, Clemson made sure he got in there to catch what Alton was saying, to catch what Mike Hardy was saying, to catch what Stephen...
I forgot Mike Hardy.
Yeah, Mike Hardy was there representing Reverend Sharpton, and Stephen Jackson was there representing C. Vernon Mason. You know, everything that went down, and it was a discussion about what was exposed in the courtroom that day. The New York Times was there, but they never printed what was going on. The Post was there, but they never printed what was going on. It was, and Our Time Press from Brooklyn came up also. They started coming up. The City Sun, well, the City Sun, by that time, I think Andy Cooper, I don't remember if Andy Cooper was still alive in '97.
We got 2 minutes.
But Clemson chronicled everything. And I know he was digitizing his work. That was the last thing Clemson was doing. He was digitizing all the film. And you've been in his basement.
Yeah.
And man, let me tell you, that basement was,
yeah.
There were tapes and cassettes and all kinds of stuff. So that was what Clemson was doing so that we could have this archival information.
And with that, we have a minute left. Well, this is awesome times, and we see our ancestors passing away. But the fight goes on, and being a videographer, documenting our history has been a calling for me. And Clemson was such a, I mean, he was steadfast and on the money at all times. And we pay homage to this great spirit, and hopefully we all can benefit from his documentation of black history and continue on the struggle of justice and peace and equality. All right, stay tuned for more of the Gilchrist Experience. The God in me loves the God in you. Gentlemen?
Amen.
I wish he could have filmed in the courtroom.